started, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put out some True Blue, and this was all in your e-packet that you got. I'm also going to be using the large brush from my Creative Blending set. If you have any dry brushing brushes, you can use whatever you have, but I prefer to have a dome shape. And then also, for those of you who've got the e-packet and you're painting along, yeah, so here's the big one, and then you have some other ones. This was what the Ms Bitsy looked like base coated, and then this is pretty much like a first stage. So you could be looking at this one. I have a close-up of her face, and then an overall of what Ms Bitsy should be looking like. And then, of course, all the instructions. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is taking my True Blue and I'm loading my brush, and my brush is dry. And then I'm going to be dry brushing, so I'm going to be removing a lot of the paint, and so that there's only a residue of paint from the brush. I do have the banner, since banner's cloth, it's going to flop around a lot. I do have it on a hardboard, so that's why mine looks solid. It is not solid. It is definitely just the Rocklon surface. So I'm going to go ahead, and when I'm along an edge, and the reason I like this shape, so when I'm along an edge, I can go back and forth and go right to the edge. And I'm doing a triangle shape, so then once I start coming up towards the hat brim, I use my circular motion. And I'm going to just let this fade away. As I have less paint, it just really works well to fade away. So on all these areas, this is very much like a flower. I was thinking about that earlier as I was looking at it. In all these areas that curve up, we're going to be putting in these highlights. So I'm going to reload my brush. And again, I'm going to go back and forth motion. And then I start using a circular motion. It's really important that you allow your highlights to fade away so they don't just look like harsh triangles. Now, I did not give myself enough time to really work that in my brush, and so that was a little bit bright. So let's see if I can just work that out. I love dry brushing, it's so forgiving. And I'm not going to take it too far out. What's really important, right now they're not really touching. If for some reason, if you bring them together, that's okay, because I'm eventually going to come over and float along the So what I'm doing is I'm taking my brush and I'm scooting it back and forth above the hat band, and then I'm going to do a really big triangle on here. And I'm not sure if you can see it as much as I can. It's really interesting when you're working on with a camera. It either intensifies or takes away the intensity of what you're working on. And as I'm looking, I can't tell on my screen how much that's showing up. I work really fast when I'm dry brushing. Probably the speed of most painters is they're going to slow it down and go like this. But I've been doing this for 30 years, so it's just kind of like riding a bike for me. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just going to continue in, and I went into the center of this. If you need to move into a smaller brush at this point, there are 3 more brushes in the set that you can go into. I just am a lazy painter, and so what I'm doing then is I'm using less pressure, so my brush does not span out as much, and then I'm connecting the 2 together. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to put this brush into water, and then in a few minutes I'm going to show you how to take the water out and to towel dry it. And we're going to use a brush that we like to float with. So I use a flat brush. Some of you are going to use angle brushes. Basically I'm going to use a 1/2 inch brush, and you can use whatever size you want. So when I float, I want to talk a little bit about that. When I float, now I have a whole video on floating, and I know many of you have probably already watched this. What I do is I want to make sure that I work my brush into it and that I have opaque through semi-transparent to transparent paint. Some painters keep working it and working it and working it and working it. And I know everyone has different techniques. So this is what I call a glaze, when basically it's almost transparent. What I want when I'm floating is I want it to be opaque through semi-opaque all the way to transparent. And so then what we're going to do is I have to turn my board, and I hope I don't make you dizzy when I do that. And I'm going to float just along the bottom. And then I'll bring this up, and I'm flipping my brush over, and I'm coming along the side. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to float along the edge. And this is a very narrow float. I'm just bringing out the brim. For those of you who have trouble floating, you should go and watch my YouTube video. I have 2, one on basic floating, and then the other one, excuse me, is more advanced floats. Like walking on a float, all the ones you love doing, circular floats. No one likes doing those. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just on the edges back here, just swipe it just a little bit. And I think we're getting some really great formation in that hat. I'm going to bring my number 8 brush back, and I just dumped it in water, and I dumped it in water so that the paint wouldn't dry in it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just really take as much of that out, and you can see I can get most of the color out. This is going to work because we're going to put festive green, not forest green, festive green out. And because I'm working with 2 cool colors, this is going to work. If I was going into, let's say, the orange, that would not be a good idea to allow color to remain in it. I'd have to completely clean it out. So I'm going to put out my festive green. And then we're going to, what I like to do before I walk out of a float, and by the way, I'm not going to touch this side right now because we're going to put the daisy there, or the flower there. But what I like to do when I walk out a float is, if I can come in and dry brush first, so I can go along that edge so easily, and then I can use my circular motion, bringing it out. And you can see how wide this black area it is. That's how wide we're going to want this float or this shade, even though I'm dry brushing it. But what's really important is that I lift my pressure up at the end and just let it fade away. We don't have any harsh lines there. for any reason you don't like that and it's not blended out, you can always go back into your base coat color, load your brush, and soften your line. And voila, it just faded away. Okay, so then we're going to also use Festive Green. I'm going to use my floating brush again. And for this I'm using a 1/2-inch brush for most of it. Some people consider that a big brush. I consider that my small brush. I normally either use a 1/2-inch brush or a 3/4 inch brush. So I'm going to just go along the edges. Right up. I went in the wrong color. I'm going to go right along the edges here and just put in a little bit of shading. I'm on the iris and I'm using Festive Green. Okay, then I want to go back in, and while we have True Blue on our palette, and I'm going to load a very, very narrow float. Let me get the green on my brush. I'm going to come in on the left side on both eyes, and I'm going to just do a little reflective light. I want to make sure that you guys can see that. The other side right here. So now this is dry already, and I love, well, so, of course now I live in Nevada and it's very dry here, so hopefully for those of you who have a lot of humidity in the air, yours is dry too. But I find the paint dries really quickly on the Rocklon, which is nice. So in the few seconds that we did that, we can come now in and we're reinforcing this with a float. And what's really wonderful is when you put your dry brush down first, the color first with dry brushing technique, and then you come over it, it looks like you can walk out a float like you are the best expert of floating. And it just builds that color up. This is the acrylic layering technique. And again, I'm not doing this side only because the flower is going to be there. If the flower was not there, I'd be doing the other side too. Then, the next color we will be putting out will be Dioxazine Purple, if that's how everyone says it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit different stroke now. Instead of just floating and coming down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of a chisel pull. And so it's going to create a little bit of texture as we shade. Underneath her hat, I'm going to just pull it like you would a regular float. But you know that I do a little pitty pat pull when I'm floating. It just helps me be able to turn my brush a little bit better. Okay, and then while we're on this side, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to just pull little teeny strokes along the outside edges. What I like about this is then if you're not that great at floating and you do tend to get a lot of texture, then this is just going to make you look like you're a master at floating, because that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing, is creating a little bit of texture. And yes, I did go out into the orange just a little bit. I'm not too worried about that. I'm doing one side and then I'm going to flip it over and do the other side of the legs. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm going to go in, and in the same method, we're going to go all over her body and into her legs a little bit. And so I'm going to just come in and create some texture, kind of just doing the same thing where I'm chisel pulling. It's going to make her look like her face is just a little dirty until it's all done. It's just indicating a little bit of texture, because spiders are, they have a little bit of, I don't know that I would call it fur, but they have texture on their bodies.
I wouldn't.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my stencil out. Inside of your stamp set, there's a stencil and it looks like this except for it's clear. And while that's super cool, a lot of people end up throwing this away. You have to make sure you don't do that, because I think it's just plain Mylar. Then also there's a right way and a wrong way. I purposely mark mine and I leave the paint on them. Also, you can see I keep a little container with these in it. They have these little masks in here, and I'm going to show you in my next class, the one with the autumn banner. I'm going to show you, we're going to be using these masks, so I want to show you that there's different ways of using it. And these came in here too, but you can see that they're clear. And when they drop down, you can't see them at all. They just disappear, and you can see that I'm pointing to it. And so you can lose them really easily. So what I like to do is, if I get paint on them, I like to just leave the paint on them. But what's really important is the position that your stencil goes in is really important, because you can see I wrote up on here and then I wrote stencil. If I flip it over, I can see that my writing's backwards. And if I were to stencil it in that position, then the stamp would not go over it. So we're going to be using our large dauber. And I want to make sure that it's a stencil or it's in the right position. And I'm going to put her about there, so it's about 1 inch of her hat band. And this is going to need 2 applications. So the first one, I'm going to come in with some light buttermilk. That's what I'm looking for. Now my dauber, my large dauber, is dry, and I'm going to show you. My paint's right there. I'm going to load it, really push it in, and then I'm going to offload it. Make sure all your areas that you floated on were dry first. So what you have is a dauber that looks kind of like a stamp pad. There's not a lot of globby paint on it. That's really important, because if you have too much paint, it will bleed. So you could tape this into position, and there's only like less than 1/2 inch over here, so you could put some tape down. But I'm in a hurry, so I'm going to just put this down. I start in the middle and work towards the edges. Okay, so you can see how nicely that went in. So I'm going to mix equal amounts of orange flame and some cadmium yellow. So in the case where this where one is thinner than the other, I let them splay out. In this case, if I have a little bit too much yellow, it's not going to hurt anything. And then I generally will use a palette knife. But when I'm painting realistically, it's really important to make sure that you have exact measurements because it can really alter the color. And so I'm just making a very light orange, a yellow orange. What's really fun now is I'm going to take and I'm going to load the dauber and put it in here. And we're going to use it like a dry brush. So I'm going to take the paint out, push some highlights in. And see how fast I can do it with this sponge too. I don't know if you can see this very well. It's very, I don't know. There's not a lot of change in this. So I'm thinking that I'm going to add a little bit more yellow just to make it show up a little bit more. I was going to say I'm brush mixing this, and in this case I guess I'm dauber mixing this. But let's see if this, yeah, this is showing up just a little bit more. I just want to have a little bit of a highlight in here. It adds just a little bit more interest to the background. Since I've used the big dauber and the small dauber, I'm going to show you how to use this tool too. So I'm going to lay this back down here, and we're going to come in with cad yellow. And I just make sure that they line up properly. And I've got my cad yellow out. And I touch it, make sure it's dry. So I'm going to load this the same way as I did the dauber. I just load it and then offload it and pounce it just a little bit on paper towel. Then I'll come in the center, and I'm pressing up and down with this one. What I like about this is it's on an angle, and for some reason it really helps with not allowing the paint to bleed underneath. Okay, so she needs to dry a little bit. What we're going to do is, if you have a little bit of the green, the festive green, we're going to come in and float behind here now and set that down. So this is going to be a very narrow float. I'm going to just go behind here. And then I'll pull it straight. We're going to take the same combination of the cadmium orange and, the orange flame and the cadmium yellow, and we'll use our number 6 brush, and we're going to dry brush her nose. So I'm loading up my brush, taking most of the paint out, and then I'm going to just dry brush the highlight in. I'm going to come in with some Red Alert, and I'm going to mix that 50-50 with some diaxazine purple. Okay, so I've just mixed diaxazine purple and Red Alert, which is a very bright red. And we're going to go in and we're going to just dry brush a little cheek on her. Well, let me soften that just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to stamp, nope, excuse me, she's still a little bit wet. So I'm going to put my brush in water and we're going to come in and we're going to float with Red Alert. Okay, so now we had gone underneath the hat with purple. What we're going to do is we're going to go underneath the hat with some lamp black. And I'm going to really work this into my brush. Remember when I told you at the beginning of class the difference between a float and a glaze? Well, I'm really working this into my brush so it's semi-transparent. And I'm going to just come in and float underneath here. And then, while I don't have much paint in here, I'm going to just float along the outside edges here. Just giving it a little bit more depth. So you can see that you can barely see that. It's because I really worked it into my brush. And then we're going to come back in. Now I did put my brush in water, but I'm taking most of the water out, and I'm going to come back in with Cad Yellow. And we're going to just put a little bit more highlight in. Okay. Oh, and then right on the teeth we needed to come in with a little bit of that black. Just above. And we can come underneath this line, and again I've loaded my paint load my brush with transparent paint. So, and it just went all the way through to an edge. So I had a little bit too much water in my brush. It's because I loaded it quickly. Okay, so the lamp black should be out on our palette, and we're going to be using the small sponge. And what you can do is you can dampen this. I put it in water, and then what I do is squeeze all the water out. So you can see nothing's dripping off of this. So what we have is just a moist sponge. And then I'm going to load it up with the lamp black. I have to put more out. These sponges take a lot, just like sponge brushes take a lot of paint. So I don't know if you just saw it, but I just stuck my stamp onto this clean acrylic handle. If your stamp never sticks, it's only because either your handle or your stamp is dirty and you simply need to wash it. I have now got my black loaded into my large sponge, very much like I loaded my dauber before, and I'm going to very quickly load it. And then I'm looking for where the 3 prongs are, and I have to stand up when I do this, so excuse me if my head gets in the way. But I'm going to line this up. And if it happens to not line up perfectly, that's fine too. I'm going to show you how to adjust that. So when I stamp, I simply press down. I don't rock my hand. And well, that was pretty good. I'm really happy with that. And then what I do is these wash up really quick. I'll just stick this in my tub too. So for this, if you have like a little bit of yellow showing, what you can do is you can come in with your Identipen and simply go, okay, I wanted it to look like that. You know, and I should have probably just gone off center a little bit more to show you how you can fix these up really quick. But I can just simply say, hey, you know, those were supposed to be there. It's supposed to be like that. There's multiple petals in behind here. So I'll even put one like that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna come in with like a number 3 round. And I'm gonna use mixture that we had with the cadmium yellow and the orange flame. And I'm gonna just pull some texture lines. You have to put a little bit of water into the paint, just a little bit. It's not quite like using a liner brush. There we go. And again, this is very whimsical, so okay, so that's looking really good. What we're going to do is we're going to come in and stipple the center of it with a little bit of the sour apple green. I just have an old brush and I'm going to dampen it. And I'm just going to come in, set it on an angle so you can see it. And we're going to stipple that. We're going to put just some highlights on the cheeks. I'm going to tap, 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 tap on the nose. And then the upper right hand side on both eyes. You have to put them on both eyes on the right hand side. Okay, you have your trick or treat and your and the spider webs. I freehanded these, and I think that you can easily do this. So I've got this zoomed in so you can see really carefully what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do this one down in this corner. What I did is started with a dot. Then I used my smaller edge and I did the letter V. Oh, that's so difficult to do a letter V, isn't it, girls? And then I just continued my letter V and just did lots of letter V's. And then you come in and it's somewhat like a letter C or a letter U. And you go all around and you continue doing that. And this is why I'm saying you could freehand these so easily. Because if you trace them on, your hand's going to get all wobbly, as you know how it is when you're tracing things on. And so if you freehand this, it's so much easier. I'm not worried about if they touch. Actually, I kind of like it better if they don't touch. I like it nice and loose. Okay, and so that's pretty much how I do the spider webs. Then for her, we need to finish her up. So what we're going to do, I want to make sure that I'm on camera here, is I come in, let me put this on angle to make sure you're seeing me. My hand gets in the way. I'm going to come in and I'm jiggling this. Now I figured we could have done this with a brush and a liner brush, but this is just so much easier, and you're going to see how awesome these Identi pens perform. I use these pens for so many things. So I'm coming along the outside edge and I'm just jiggling my hand, if you want to think letter Z's. Then I'm going to come into the rest of her body. And this also is very loose. So you can see I'm not spending a lot of time on this. Some of them are individual lines. And so what I'm going to do also right now is I'm going to pull her eyelashes. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You could also pull these with a liner brush if you wanted to, but not necessary. And they'll all be done the same way. And so the last thing I'm going to do is come in with my stipple brush and use some cadmium yellow and stipple in just a little highlight right there. So this is the finished Ms Bitsy. You can see how I did all of the spiderwebs just a little bit differently, but I started all of them with the little V shape. And now you can see some of the highlights also just going around here. Just gives the background a little bit more interest. And this is the way the entire banner looks, with the stripes at the top and the trick or treat at the bottom. The only thing I didn't show is how to put the dowel rod and end caps in. I simply painted those and then string them through the top and add some cording. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And also, I would love if you would subscribe to my channel, because that way you will get notifications of when I do new videos. So until the next video, may painting always bring you joy.